It was the annual Memorial Day barbecue in our suburban neighborhood, and I should have been enjoying the warm sunshine and the mouth-watering aromas of sizzling burgers. Instead, a cold sense of dread washed over me as I overheard a hushed conversation between Nancy Wilson and Claire Robinson. "Did you hear about Neil Morrison's shady business dealings?" Nancy whispered conspiratorially. "Rumor has it he's been skimming profits off that craft brewery his wife inherited." My heart plummeted at the mention of my husband's name. I discreetly moved closer, trying to blend in with the gathered crowd. Claire shook her head. "That's not all. I heard he's been having an affair with that young aide who works for the mayor." Rage and disbelief boiled inside me. An affair? Embezzlement? Impossible. Neil and I had been together since college, building a wonderful life centered around family values and my grandfather's cherished brewery legacy. "Mom, can I have another burger?" My 5-year-old son Milo tugged at my sundress, jarring me from my whirlwind of emotions. I plastered on a smile, ruffling his blonde hair. "Of course, honey. Why don't you ask Dad to grill you one?" As Milo scampered off to find Neil, I caught the pitying looks from Nancy and Claire. Did they suspect I had overheard? My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. How dare they gossip about my husband behind my back? Later that evening, after putting Milo to bed, I stormed into the living room where Neil was watching TV. "We need to talk." He glanced up, eyebrows raised. "What's wrong, babe?" The use of that sickeningly sweet nickname made me want to scream. "I overheard something disturbing at the barbecue today, about you." Neil's expression hardened, eyes narrowing. "What kind of rumors are people spreading now? That you've been embezzling from the brewery and having an affair with the mayor's aide." The words tumbled out in a torrent, each one slicing into my heart. For a long moment Neil was silent, his face unreadable. Then he let out a bitter laugh. "You can't be serious, Lena. You're going to believe the malicious gossip of bored suburban housewives over your own husband?" "So it's not true?" I pressed, searching his eyes for any flicker of deception. He rose from the couch, putting his hands on my shoulders as he looked me squarely in the eye. "Of course it's not true. You're my world, Lena. You and Milo. I would never betray our family like that." His words should have reassured me, but a nagging seed of doubt had taken root. As I gazed at the man I thought I knew better than anyone, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying to me. Over the next few days, I found myself scrutinizing Neil's every move, his tardiness from work, his secretive phone calls, his unexplained absences. Each discrepancy fed the growing beast of suspicion gnawing at me. I knew I couldn't ignore the rumors any longer. For the sake of my son and my family's legacy, I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know, the secrets I was about to uncover would shatter my world forever. In the days following the barbecue, I was consumed by a hunger for the truth that gnawed at me incessantly. Neil's nonchalant dismissal of the rumors did little to quell my growing doubts and suspicions about who he really was. I knew I needed evidence, something concrete, to validate or refute the whispers about his misdeeds. Hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but that felt like an extreme violation of Neil's privacy, at least for now. My mind raced as I tried to think of ways to discreetly look into his affairs. That's when I noticed his car's glove compartment looked disheveled, as if it had been hastily closed. Steeling my nerves, I popped it open after Neil left for work one morning. My hands trembled as I rummaged through its contents until my fingers landed on an unfamiliar burner phone. My heart pounded as I turned it on, watching the home screen flicker to life, to reveal a stream of coded messages. 7 p.m., warehouse on 5th. Package is secured, funds will be transferred. Need to keep this off HQ's radar. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter with each cryptic message I read. What kind of shady deals was Neil mixed up in? I felt sick just imagining the possibilities. "Working late again, babe?" Neil's voice made me nearly jump out of my skin as he strolled into the living room, loosening his tie. I fumbled to turn off the burner phone and stuff it back into the glove compartment. "Yeah, just catching up on some emails." He quirked an eyebrow at me. "Everything okay? You seem jumpy." Mustering all my willpower, I plastered on what I hoped was a convincing smile. "I'm fine, just feeling a bit run down from this merger we're working on at the brewery." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but Neil seemed to accept it with a nod and a peck on my cheek before wandering off to the kitchen. That night, after Neil fell into a whiskey-laced slumber, I tiptoed to his home office and booted up his computer, my heart pounding in my ears. If he was engaging in something illegal, maybe there would be evidence on here. Email after email only deepened the pit of dread in my stomach. Communications about under-the-table payments, confidential brewery recipes being covertly shared with competitors, dollar amounts that made my head spin just looking at them. The man I thought I knew was a mirage. This emails laid bare the harsh reality. Neil was a liar, a cheat, a criminal. He had been defrauding my family's company and betraying my trust in the cruelest way imaginable. Tears stung my eyes as I finally understood the depth of his deceit. But my anguish was rapidly being replaced by a scorching anger. How dare he defile everything my grandfather built from the ground up through decades of hard work and integrity? I would make Neil pay for this. He would face the consequences for every last illicit deal, every betrayal, every moment of treachery. I didn't know how yet, but I would bring him down. No more Mrs. Nice Wife. It was time to fight fire with fire. Armed with the damning evidence from Neil's computer and burner phone, I knew I needed professional help to properly investigate the full extent of his betrayal. I kept a low profile around Neil, continuing to play the role of the doting, oblivious wife as I secretly met with a private investigator named Frank Jennings. Frank was grizzled and no-nonsense, just the type I needed to discreetly dig into Neil's tangled web of lies. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town to discuss my concerns. "You were right to come to me, Mrs. Morrison," Frank said gruffly as he pored over the emails and messages I had printed out. "This is some serious shady shit your husband is mixed up in." I cringed at his blunt delivery, but appreciated his candidness. "Just call me Lena. And yeah, it seems Neil has been very busy behind my back with God knows what kind of illegal dealings." Frank nodded, rubbing his stubbly chin. "Well, from what I can gather, we're looking at embezzlement, fraud, corporate espionage, and this here?" He tapped one of the messages. "Looks like your hubby might also be having himself a little extramarital fun, too." My cheeks burned at the insinuation. An affair? With who?" "Some young thing name of Marina Castillo. She's an aide for the mayor." The words felt like a physical blow to my gut. An affair. How could I have been so blind? Over the next few weeks, Frank gathered an overwhelming mountain of proof. Financial records, surveillance photos, witness testimonies. It became undeniable that Neil had not only been systematically looting funds from my family's brewery, but also selling corporate secrets and confidential recipes to our biggest competitors. And his mistress, Marina, appeared to be his willing accomplice and confidant through it all. One night, Frank played me an audio recording of Neil and Marina meeting at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Between the lewd giggling and cringeworthy pet names, my heart shattered into pieces all over again as I listened to them conspire about their next underhanded scheme. When the recording ended, tears of humiliation and rage streamed down my face. Frank sat silently, no doubt used to these kinds of emotional breakdowns from the spouses of cheaters and liars like Neil. But underneath my grief, a bright ember of fury was being stoked into an unquenchable blaze. I would make Neil regret ever crossing me and jeopardizing everything I held dear. "What now, Mrs. Lena?" Frank asked gruffly, sensing the shift in my demeanor. I stared out the diner window at the grimy street, my jaw clenched with resolve. "Now, we take that bastard down. Make him pay for every last sin." For weeks, I had been frozen by the agony of Neil's betrayal. But the time for wallowing in shock and pity was over. He had awoken a vengeful awoke in me, and heaven help Neil once I was done with him. The drive home from the diner felt like I was in a trance. My mind whirled with equal parts fury and strategy as I plotted how to bring Neil's house of lies crashing down around him. Part of me yearned to storm into the house, to hurl the incriminating evidence in his smug face, and watch the shock and shame wash over him. But I forced myself to remain calm and calculated. I needed to keep playing the role of the unsuspecting wife a little longer, let him dig his grave even deeper before I buried him in it. When I arrived home, Neil was watching TV with a glass of scotch, looking utterly unbothered. "Hey, babe, you were out late again," he remarked as I entered, putting on my best nonchalant act. Yeah, just tying up some loose ends at the brewery. The lie slid smoothly off my tongue as I fought to keep my contempt hidden behind a placid smile. Neil grinned and patted the spot beside him. Well, get your cute butt over here. There's still time for a little nightcap. He waggled his eyebrows lasciviously. Bile rose in my throat as I imagined him making those same lecherous overtures to his precious Marina, but I swallowed my revulsion and slinked over to cuddle up beside him, playing along with his game as I plotted his downfall. Over the next few days, I watched Neil continue his dual life of deception, smiling to my face while gallivanting around indulging his sleazy vices behind my back. The oblivious routine he kept up around me, unaware of how much I knew, was almost comical. Finally, I could take no more of the charade. I cornered him in the kitchen one afternoon after confirming Milo was over at a friend's house. "What's going on, babe? You've seemed off lately," Neil asked with a carefully measured dose of concern as he poured himself a drink. I stalked up to him, snatching the crystal tumbler from his hands and slamming it down with a crash, splattering scotch across the counter. "Cut the crap, Neil! I know everything!" He recoiled in shock before quickly regaining his composure, lips curling into a sneer. "Really? And what, pray tell, do you think you know? I know about the embezzlement from my family's company. I know you've been selling corporate secrets to our competitors. I know about your sordid little fling with Marina." To his credit, Neil barely flinched, covering his surprise with a condescending chuckle. Lena, you've really let your imagination run wild this time. This is just sad, not to mention insulting. After everything we've been through together?" He took a step towards me, reaching out to caress my cheek almost tenderly. "You're my world, babe. You have to know that. All these crazy accusations, they're just paranoid delusions." My blood boiled at his mocking, gaslighting tone. In one blistering motion, I whipped out the burner phone with the incriminating messages and hurled it squarely at his face, watching it clock him in the jaw. Neil reeled back, clutching his face and staring at me with a mask of shock and wounded pride. "You crazy bye!" "Shut up," I roared, adrenaline and pure venom coursing through me. "I have proof of every last depraved thing you've done. Financial records, recordings, everything. So cut the innocent act, you slimy bastard." We stood in seething silence for a moment, each glaring at the other with a molten contempt. His eyes flickered with uncertainty for a brief second before hardening once more. Neil straightened up, puffing out his chest defiantly. "You think you've got me all figured out, huh? You don't know a goddamn thing, Lena. Not really." With that vague, ominous warning, he stormed out, leaving me breathing raggedly amid the wreckage. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now the real battle would begin. After the explosive confrontation with Neil, the air was thick with tension around the house. He tried putting on a nonchalant front, but I could sense the disquiet lurking beneath his arrogant facade. For my part, I stayed coldly civil, biding my time and gathering more ammunition for the war ahead. Frank, the private investigator, had become my closest confidant during this chaos. We met frequently at our discreet diner to review the mounting evidence of Neil's malfeasance. "This is some heavy stuff, Lena," Frank remarked one afternoon as he shuffled through the incriminating financial records. "Your husband's looking at serious prison time if we take this to the DA's office." I nodded grimly, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. As much as Neil's betrayal sickened me, the idea of him rotting behind bars gave me no joy either. I just wanted to uproot the cancer he'd planted in my family's legacy. "Actually, Frank, I had something else in mind for dealing with this dirtbag." He cocked an eyebrow quizzically, so I laid out my plan to launch a coordinated takedown at the brewery's upcoming annual gala. Neil's misdeeds would be explosively revealed before the entire community, destroying his credibility and showing everyone his true colors. "You sure you want to go nuclear like that?" Frank asked skeptically. "Public humiliation on that scale, it's no walk in the park." "He deserves that and more for what he's done," I replied, feeling my anger flare up again. "Neil has jeopardized my family, our business, our entire livelihood, all in service of funding his vices and stroking his ego. It's time he suffered the consequences of his selfish choices." In the following days, I doubled down on my efforts, coordinating an allied strike force against Neil. Longtime business partners and vendors Neil had swindled were eager to join the crusade after I presented the facts. Several employees he'd deceived also threw their support behind my insurrection, providing even more damaging testimony. On the home front, Neil had clearly sensed the shifting winds. His usual suave hubris had given way to sullenness and paranoia that he tried masking with more alcohol. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" he demanded one night as I lingered in the living room while he channel surfed. I met his accusatory glare evenly. "Like what? Like you've got some twisted scheme brewing in that head of yours?" He took a swig from his tumbler, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. I shrugged nonchalantly. "What would give you that idea?" Neil opened his mouth to retort, but seemed to think better of it, grinding his jaw sullenly before returning his gaze to the television. I watched dispassionately as he quickly drained his glass, gazing through hooded eyes at the monster I once called my husband. The gala was only a few nights away. He would finally get the reckoning he deserved, and the brewing storm would break at last. The night of the brewery's annual gala had arrived, and an electric sense of anticipation coursed through me. Tonight would be Neil's night of reckoning, after months of lies and betrayal. I had gathered an army of witnesses and co-conspirators, disgruntled employees, vengeful business partners, anyone Neil had wronged during his reign of duplicity. Frank and I had meticulously compiled all the evidence into an undeniable case that would detonate at the climax of the evening. "You ready for this?" Frank muttered under his breath as we made our entrance into the lavish event hall where the gala was being held. I gave a terse nod, scanning the milling crowd of the city's business elite until my eyes landed on Neil, holding court near the bar as always. He was all smiles and swagger, downing a glass of scotch and soaking up the attention. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of my old affection for him stirred in my chest. Then I remembered the mountains of incriminating evidence detailing his litany of sins, the embezzlement, the corporate espionage, the callous infidelity. Any empathy I felt withered on the vine. The gala proceeded according to tradition: stuffy speeches, self-congratulatory award presentations, endless schmoozing over overpriced hors d'oeuvres. All the while, I bided my time, waiting for Neil's moment in the spotlight when I would detonate the bombshell. "And what a year it's been for our hometown brewery," the mayor herself was saying as she took the stage, grinning broadly with Neil standing beside her. "Thanks to our good friend Neil Morrison's outstanding leadership, the company has achieved remarkable growth and success." I caught Neil's eye from across the crowd and the ghost of a wink as he basked in the accolades. I suppressed the urge to sneer in revulsion. "So it is my privilege to present to Neil the Businessman of the Year award." The mayor began clapping proudly, the entire audience following suit in thunderous applause. This was it. I gave Frank a steely nod, and he immediately dimmed the lights as I strode up on stage, ripping the microphone from the mayor's hands. "Hold your applause," I growled, glaring out at the shocked, confused crowd. "Neil Morrison doesn't deserve any awards tonight. He's a crook and a criminal who's been robbing this brewery and this city blind." A deafening silence fell over the audience. Neil's expression morphed into one of outraged disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" He sputtered as I unleashed a blistering recitation of the laundry list of offenses: embezzlement figures, incriminating emails, records of illicit transactions. Each salvo burrowed in like shrapnel, drawing gasps and murmurs from the gala crowd. When I turned to Neil's mistress, Marina, sitting in the front row, I saw her features contorted in horror. And let's not forget, while Neil was looting from his employees and business partners, he was also stupping around behind my back with this little hussy. Chaos erupted in the event hall as Marina burst into hysterical tears. Other audience members erupted in raucous shouts and boos directed towards the stage. Through it all, Neil stood rooted to the spot, his face rapidly cycling through a spectrum of emotions: anger, panic, fear. I locked eyes with him, letting him absorb the debilitating optics of his public immolation. After sowing so many seeds of betrayal and deception, the harvest he reaped was a bitter, devastating reckoning. Within days, Neil was under arrest, slapped with multiple charges including embezzlement, bribery, and corporate fraud. His reputation and credibility were in smoldering ruins. I couldn't deny a deep sense of gratification watching karma render its ultimate verdict on my deceitful husband. But our saga wasn't over quite yet. In the aftermath of Neil's catastrophic public downfall at the gala, the legal heavens came crashing down on him with biblical force. He was swiftly arrested and hauled off in handcuffs as the damning evidence I had compiled with Frank's help was presented to the district attorney. Charges rained down like hellfire: embezzlement, corporate fraud, tax evasion, bribery. For weeks leading up to Neil's trial, a frenzy of media coverage dissected every tawdry detail of his betrayals. His affair with Marina was breathlessly splashed across the front pages, complete with the sordid recordings Frank had obtained of their indiscreet liaisons. The brewing company's shady business dealings and the plundering of its coffers were mercilessly exposed for the world to gape at. Reporters camped outside our home, hungry for any fresh morsel of scandal from the Morrison family drama. Through it all, Neil remained defiant, head held high as he arrived at the courthouse in his expensive suits. Only the faint muscle twitching in his clenched jaw hinted at the maelstrom of panic and loathing swirling beneath that arrogant veneer. "This is a disgraceful sham being perpetrated by my unhinged wife," he snarled at a pack of reporters shoving microphones in his face. "I was betrayed and set up by someone I trusted, but the truth will come out, and I will be exonerated." His audacious use of the victim card only fueled my resolve as I took the stand and mercilessly dismantled his lies over multiple searing days of testimony. I presented the documented evidence, layer by damning layer, until his pathetic protestations of innocence crumbled to ash. Marina, his former mistress, proved to be his ultimate undoing. Likely realizing her culpability and facing potential charges of her own, she flipped on Neil in exchange for leniency. The lurid details of their affair and illicit financial entanglements she revealed had the jury visibly recoiling in disgust. "Your Honor, this man is a rapacious, narcissistic con-man who shattered my family's legacy with his unchecked greed and debauchery," I declared in my closing statement, leveling an accusatory glare at Neil. "He has earned nothing less than the most severe punishment the law can deliver." Neil held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Perhaps in those seconds, he finally glimpsed the man he had become, a ravenous, immoral shell obsessed only with satisfying his own vain desires at any cost. When the judge finally read the jury's verdict of guilty on all counts, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. Justice, at long last. The emotional circus played out in hushed murmurs and camera flashes around me. But my focus was solely on Neil, shoulders slumped in defeat, as the bailiff slapped cuffs around his wrists and led him away to await sentencing. He deserved every agonizing second of this humiliation after the suffering he had inflicted on me and our family. At the sentencing weeks later, the judge took no pity on Neil, slamming him with over 2 decades in federal prison, plus millions in fines and restitution. As they hauled him off, I locked eyes with my disgraced husband one final time. He opened his mouth, perhaps to finally offer a sliver of apology or remorse. But I'd heard enough of his lies. With a curt shake of my head, I turned and walked out of that courtroom a free woman at last. The lengthy legal saga was finally over. But aside from justice served, there remained the matter of salvaging my family's brewery from the rubble of Neil's selfish decimation. With Neil's epic downfall now complete and the legal turmoil finally behind me, it was time to start rebuilding what he had so selfishly torn down. My family's brewery needed to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of his greed and deception. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, poring over the company's finances with a newly hired forensic accounting team. The scale of Neil's embezzlement and corporate sabotage was even more staggering than I had initially uncovered. Millions had been siphoned into his secret slush funds. Invaluable trade secrets and recipes had been illicitly sold off to our biggest competitors, eroding our market share and brand value. It was a miracle the entire enterprise hadn't already collapsed under the weight of his treachery. My first priority was to cut out the lingering rot and install safeguards to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. I fired every last person, even tangentially complicit in enabling Neil's underhanded schemes. A new, if costly, corporate ethics program with robust auditing and oversight protocols was swiftly implemented. With a new, streamlined leadership team of my most trusted allies in place, we began the painful process of judicial asset repatriation, recouping as much of the stolen money and intellectual property as possible. It was a labyrinthine legal quagmire that seemed never-ending. "Don't worry, Mom, you've got this," Milo encouraged one night as I was hunched over spreadsheets, my eyes throbbing from hours of scrutinizing Neil's complex money trail. "You're the strongest person I know." My son's words were a soothing balm. He was my true north, the unblemished kernel of goodness that had survived the scorched earth of his father's villainy. I pulled Milo into a fierce embrace, realizing just how much of his childhood had been tainted by the atmospheric tension of Neil's secret misdeeds. No more. I vowed then and there that Milo would grow up witnessing the integrity and righteous resilience modeled by his mother in the wake of this nightmare. With each agonizing step forward in the long journey of restoring the brewery's tarnished reputation and fiscal solvency, I felt lighter. The shackles of denial and delusion about Neil's true nature no longer weighed me down. I had faced the hardest truths about the man I once loved and slayed those dragons. Some nights I still found my mind wandering, wondering what direction Neil's life had careened off toward behind those cold, unfeeling bars of his prison cell. I felt pity for the broken husk of a man he must have become, but any lingering hint of affection had been seared away by the betrayal and trauma he inflicted. A few years into my tenure as the new CEO, I made the ceremonial first pour of a fresh batch of our flagship IPA, using the original recipe from my grandfather's time at the helm. As I sipped the crisp, hoppy ale, the flavors carried more significance than just simple refreshment. This beer represented reclaimed legacy, righteous perseverance in the face of greed and deception, and enduring pride in doing things the right way through honesty and integrity. The brewery's annual holiday gala arrived again, always a festive source of community cheer and revelry. Except now, there were no seedy undercurrents of scandal or seething familial disharmony. Just joy, optimism, and renewed faith in the decades-old local institution that had been reborn under my steady hand. As I looked out over the smiling, celebrating crowd, I felt an immense sense of catharsis. The demons had been purged, the damage repaired. Neil's poisoned husk had been excised, and my family's true spirit preserved. It was a new dawn for me, for Milo, for the brewery's next generation of ethical, honorable leadership. My vengeance had been equally punishing and restorative, fitting justice for the man who tried to burn it all down for his own selfish vices. And in the end, I got to build it all back up stronger than ever before.